I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon when someone knocked on my front door. I opened it expecting a neighbor or maybe a delivery driver. Instead, there was a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard and a large envelope. He asked if I was Lorene Haddix. I said yes. He handed me the envelope and said I had been served. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned around and walked back to his car. I stood in the doorway with my hands shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of legal papers with a bold heading that read, "Notice to vacate." The document said I had 30 days to leave the property. I read the words 3 times because they didn't make sense. This was my house. I had lived here for 19 years. My husband built this home with his own 2 hands. I called the number on the papers and asked what was going on. A woman's voice on the other end told me that according to county records, the property had been transferred to a new owner 3 months ago. The new owner was requesting that I leave. I asked who the new owner was. She said the name listed was Garrett Haddix, my stepson, my husband's only child, the man I had trusted like my own flesh and blood. My name is Lorene Haddix. I am 61 years old, and the person I treated like family had just made me homeless. Let me take you back to how this all started. I met my husband, Raymond, when I was 42 years old. It was a second marriage for both of us. He had lost his first wife to cancer when his son, Garrett, was just 10 years old. I had gone through a difficult divorce in my 30s and spent years thinking I would never find love again. Then Raymond walked into my life and changed everything. Raymond was a building contractor. He worked with his hands and took pride in everything he created. When we decided to get married, he told me he wanted to build us a home from scratch, a place that was just ours. So he did. He designed every room himself. He installed the custom cabinets in the kitchen. He built the stone fireplace in the living room where we spent cold winter nights together. He constructed the wraparound porch where we watched fireflies dance on summer evenings. That house wasn't just a building. It was a love letter written in wood and stone. Raymond had a son named Garrett from his first marriage. Garrett was 15 when I came into the picture. I never tried to replace his mother. I knew that would have been wrong. Instead, I tried to be a steady and supportive presence in his life. I attended his football games in high school. I helped him fill out college applications. I celebrated his graduation and cried happy tears at his wedding. When he and his wife Tanya had children, I treated those kids like my own grandchildren. Over the years, I believed Garrett and I had built something real. He called me on Mother's Day. He visited during holidays with his family. He hugged me and told me he loved me. I considered him my son in every way that mattered. I thought he felt the same way about me. 6 months ago, Raymond got sick. The doctors found pancreatic cancer and told us it had already spread. There was nothing they could do except make him comfortable. Raymond fought as hard as he could, but the disease moved fast. Within 8 weeks, my husband was gone. I fell apart after he died. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching his clothes and his tools, and crying until I ran out of tears. The grief was so heavy I could barely breathe. During those dark days, Garrett stepped up. He handled the funeral arrangements. He brought me food and sat with me while I cried. He told me we would get through this together. I felt so grateful to have him by my side. I had no idea he was already planning to take everything from me. If you have ever put your trust in the wrong person, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. 2 weeks after we buried Raymond, Garrett came to the house with a folder tucked under his arm. He said there was paperwork that needed to be taken care of. He explained that Raymond had a life insurance policy, and there were forms that needed my signature to release the funds. He also mentioned something about estate documents and transferring titles. He spoke quickly and used words I didn't fully understand, legal terms, financial language, things that felt important but confusing. I was still deep in my grief during those days. I could barely remember to eat breakfast. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for Raymond's side of the bed, and feel the cold, empty sheets where he used to sleep. My doctor had given me medication to help with anxiety and to help me rest. My mind felt like it was wrapped in fog. Concentrating on anything for more than a few minutes was almost impossible. Garrett sat down with me at the kitchen table, the same table where Raymond and I had shared thousands of meals together. He spread out the paper and started flipping through them one by one. He pointed to blank lines and told me where to sign. He said things like, "This one is just a formality, and this one allows the insurance company to process the claim." He never gave me time to read anything. He would slide one paper away as soon as I signed it and place another one in front of me. At one point, I asked if I should have a lawyer look at these documents. Garrett laughed softly and shook his head. He said there was no need for that. He said these were standard forms, and hiring a lawyer would just slow everything down and cost money we didn't need to spend. He reminded me that he was family. He said I could trust him completely. He looked me in the eyes and told me he would never do anything to hurt me. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? This was the same young man I had watched grow up, the same person who had called me mom at his wedding, the same son who had held my hand at Raymond's funeral and promised we would take care of each other. I signed every single page he put in front of me without reading a word. When he was finished, Garrett gathered all the papers back into his folder. He thanked me and told me he would handle everything from here. He gave me a hug before he left and said he would check on me in a few days. I watched him drive away and felt grateful that I wasn't alone in this. I thought Raymond would be so proud of how his son was stepping up during this difficult time. After that day, Garrett's visits became less frequent. The first week he called twice. The second week, he called once. By the third week, I was lucky to get a text message. He always had an excuse. Work was busy. The kids had activities. Tanya wasn't feeling well. I told myself it was fine. Everyone has their own life to manage. I didn't want to be a burden. I focused on putting myself back together. I joined a grief support group at my church and met other widows who understood what I was going through. I started taking short walks around the neighborhood to get fresh air. I called old friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Slowly, I began to feel like I might be able to survive this loss and find some kind of new normal. Then, the knock on the door came. The man in the suit, the envelope, the eviction notice. I read the papers over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. According to the documents, I had signed away my home to Garrett 3 months earlier. I had also signed a paper saying I was giving up any claim to Raymond's estate in exchange for $5,000. Money I had never received. Money I had never even heard about until that moment. I grabbed my phone and called Garrett. The phone rang twice and then went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I sent him a text message demanding to know what was happening. He never responded. The man I trusted like a son had vanished with everything I had. I barely slept that night. I sat in my living room staring at the eviction notice until the words blurred together. My mind kept racing through every possible explanation. Maybe there had been a mistake at the county office. Maybe someone had stolen Garrett's identity and filed fake documents. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a simple phone call. I kept reaching for reasons that didn't involve the truth I wasn't ready to accept. The next morning, I drove to Garrett's house. It was about 40 minutes away in a newer subdivision with big lawns and 2-car garages. I had been there dozens of times for birthday parties and holiday dinners. I pulled into the driveway and noticed that both cars were gone. The blinds were closed and no lights were on inside. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again harder. Nothing. A woman from the house next door came outside to check her mailbox. I asked her if she had seen Garrett or Tanya recently. She told me they had left for a vacation in Florida a few days ago. She said they seemed excited and mentioned something about staying for 2 weeks. My stomach dropped. While I was sitting at home terrified of losing everything, my stepson was on a beach somewhere spending money that belonged to me. I drove straight to the office of a lawyer named Douglas Finney. He was an old friend of Raymond's who had helped us with legal matters over the years. He had drawn up our wills and handled the paperwork when Raymond officially added my name to the deed of the house. Douglas knew our family. He knew our history. I trusted him to tell me the truth. I sat in his office and explained everything that had happened. I showed him the eviction notice and told him about the papers Garrett had asked me to sign after the funeral. I admitted that I hadn't read any of them. I told him how Garrett had rushed through everything and assured me it was all routine. Douglas listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. He told me he needed to see the actual documents I had signed. I explained that I never received copies. Garrett took everything with him. Douglas nodded and said he would request copies from the county recorder's office and the insurance company. He told me to go home and try to stay calm while he gathered information. He promised to call me as soon as he knew something. 3 days later, Douglas called and asked me to come back to his office. His voice sounded serious, and that made my heart race. When I arrived, he had a stack of papers spread across his desk. He looked at me with concern in his eyes before he started explaining what he had found. Mixed in with the legitimate insurance forms were 2 other documents that I had unknowingly signed. The first was a quitclaim deed. It transferred full ownership of my home from my name to Garrett's name. With my signature on that paper, I had legally given away the house Raymond built for us. The second document was even worse. It stated that I was voluntarily giving up all claims to Raymond's estate in exchange for a one-time payment of $5,000. I told Douglas I never received any money. He said he knew. There was no record of any payment being made. No check, no bank transfer, nothing. Garrett had written that clause into the document to make it look like a legitimate transaction, but he never intended to pay me a single dollar. Douglas told me the total value of what Garrett had taken. Raymond's life insurance policy was worth $400,000. The house was valued at $350,000. In total, my stepson had stolen $750,000 from me while I was too broken with grief to notice. I sat in that chair feeling like the floor had collapsed beneath me. Then something shifted inside my chest. The sadness turned into something harder. I looked at Douglas and told him I wanted to fight. I wanted to take back every single thing that was stolen from me. Douglas got to work immediately. He told me that what Garrett had done was not just morally wrong, but legally criminal. He explained that tricking someone into signing documents while they are grieving and medicated is considered fraud and undue influence under the law. We had a strong case, but we needed to build it carefully with solid evidence that would hold up in court. The first thing Douglas did was gather witness statements. He spoke to my neighbors who had seen me in the weeks after Raymond's funeral. They described how I could barely walk to the mailbox without crying. They talked about how thin and exhausted I looked. One neighbor said she had brought me soup because she was worried I wasn't eating at all. These statements painted a clear picture of how vulnerable I was during the time Garrett had me sign those papers. Douglas also obtained my medical records from that period. My doctor confirmed that I had been prescribed medication for grief and anxiety. The doctor wrote a statement explaining that patients on those medications often have difficulty concentrating and may not fully understand complex documents. This was powerful evidence that I was not in a proper state of mind to sign away my home and my inheritance. Then came the biggest break in the case. Douglas tracked down the notary public who had witnessed my signature on the documents. At first, the notary was defensive and insisted everything was done properly. But when Douglas pressed harder, the notary admitted the truth. She said Garrett had rushed through the entire process. He told her that I was elderly and confused and that she should just stamp the papers without asking too many questions. She said she felt uncomfortable at the time, but Garrett assured her it was all legitimate family business. Her statement proved that Garrett had deliberately manipulated the situation. We filed a lawsuit against Garrett for fraud, theft, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. When he was served with the papers, he tried to fight back. His lawyer argued that I had signed everything voluntarily and that I understood what I was doing. He claimed that the $5,000 payment had been made in cash and that I was simply lying about not receiving it. But his story fell apart under scrutiny. Douglas subpoenaed Garrett's bank records, and they told the real story. Within days of Raymond's death, Garrett had deposited the entire $400,000 life insurance payout into his personal checking account. He had already spent a large portion. He bought a brand new truck for $60,000. He made a down payment on a vacation condo in Florida. He took his family on expensive trips and bought designer clothes for his wife. There was no record of any $5,000 payment to me, not a check, not a withdrawal, nothing. The case went before a judge in county court. I sat in the courtroom wearing the same black dress I had worn to Raymond's funeral. Garrett sat on the other side of the room with his lawyer. He never once looked in my direction. The man who used to hug me and call me Mom couldn't even meet my eyes. The judge reviewed all the evidence carefully. She listened to testimony from my neighbors, my doctor, and the notary public. She examined the bank records and the forged documents. When she delivered her ruling, her voice was firm and clear. She declared that the property transfer was void due to fraud and undue influence. Ownership of the house was restored to me immediately. She ordered Garrett to repay the full amount of the life insurance plus damages and attorney fee. She also referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. As I stood up to leave the courtroom, Garrett finally spoke to me. He said I was ruining his life. He said I was destroying his family over money. I stopped walking and turned to face him. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "No, Garrett, you ruined your own life. Your father would be ashamed of what you have become." Those were the last words I ever spoke to him. The district attorney took the case seriously. After reviewing all the evidence, they filed criminal charges against Garrett for elder fraud and theft by deception. These were serious felonies that carried significant prison time. Garrett's lawyer tried to negotiate a deal, but the prosecutor was determined to see justice served. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no way for Garrett to escape what he had done. Rather than face a trial where all his lies would be exposed in public, Garrett pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. He was also ordered to make full restitution payments for the rest of his life until every dollar was returned to me. When the sentence was read aloud, Garrett stood with his head down. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the floor like a man who had finally run out of tricks. I watched them lead him away in handcuffs. I thought I would feel satisfaction in that moment, but instead, I felt empty. This was the boy I had helped raise, the young man whose football games I had cheered at, the person I had welcomed into my heart as my own son. Now he was a convicted criminal being escorted to prison. There was no joy in that, only sadness for what could have been and what was lost forever. I moved back into my home the following week. The first thing I did was walk through every room slowly and touch the walls Raymond had built. I ran my fingers along the kitchen cabinets he had crafted by hand. I sat on the porch where we used to watch sunsets together, and I let myself cry. But these tears were different from the ones I had shed before. They were tears of relief and gratitude. I had almost lost everything, but I had found the strength to fight back. In the months that followed, I made changes to protect myself. Douglas helped me set up a trust to manage my property and finances. He connected me with a financial advisor who explained how to guard against exploitation. I updated my will and made sure that every document was reviewed by someone I trusted before I signed anything. I would never again let grief make me careless with my future. I also decided to use my experience to help others. I started speaking at senior centers and church groups about the warning signs of financial exploitation. I told my story openly and honestly so that other widows and elderly people would know what to watch for. I explained how predators often wait until you are most vulnerable before they strike. I taught people to always read every document, to always ask questions, and to never sign anything under pressure, no matter who is asking. One afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in the mail. The return address showed it was from Tanya, Garrett's wife. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me stop. I sat down at the kitchen table and read her words carefully. Tanya had divorced Garrett after his arrest. She wrote that she was sorry for not seeing what was happening sooner. She told me that while going through Garrett's belongings, she had found emails he had written months before Raymond even died. Those emails showed that Garrett had been planning the fraud for a long time. He had been waiting for his father to pass away so he could take everything. Tanya said she had cut all ties with him and was raising her children to understand that what their father did was wrong. She wanted me to know the full truth, even though it was painful. I set the letter down and sat quietly for a long time. I thought about Raymond and how much he had loved his son. I wondered if Garrett had always been capable of such cruelty, or if something had gone wrong along the way. I would never know the answer, but I knew one thing for certain. I had survived. I had refused to be a victim, and I would spend the rest of my days in the home Raymond built for me, surrounded by peace I had earned through my own courage. If this story reminded you to protect yourself and the people you love, make sure to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments if you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely.